By now, you've probably heard the story of the 16-year-old boy who flew from California to Hawaii in the wheel well of a 767. It's an incredible tale, apparently completely true, at least according to the FBI. But what you haven't heard is, how did this young stowaway manage to endure 80 degrees below zero at 40,000 feet? We'll get to that in a moment. But first, here's our science and technology correspondent, Jake Ward.
Stowing away in the wheel well of a jet almost always ends in death, and there are two reasons. The first is lack of oxygen. Above 10,000 feet, the FAA mandates that any pilot left alone in the cockpit has to wear an oxygen mask because the threat of a sudden loss of cabin pressure means that hypoxia could conceivably set in. That's lack of oxygen to the brain, and it can very quickly render somebody useless at the wheel. Above 18,000 feet, hypoxia is very, very extreme, and past 26,000 feet, eventually it will kill you because you simply cannot breathe in enough oxygen over time to replenish what your brain needs. The second factor is cold. At 35,000 feet, which is how high these planes fly, you're going to have an ambient outside temperature of negative 65 degrees Fahrenheit. That is a very, very hard thing to survive as well. It'll put you into hypothermia very quickly. So how is it possible that this teenager could have survived 35,000 feet and negative 65 degrees Fahrenheit? Well, he's not the first. There have been instances in which people have survived this kind of experience, so many that the FAA actually did a study in 1993 on the very subject. They surmised that it might be possible that ambient heat might come off of the wheels. They pick up a certain amount during takeoff because of friction, they hang onto that heat, they go up into the bay, and suddenly you're up there with them, and this keeps you alive for a little while. Plus, once this runs out, and you are at that point already unconscious because you're high enough up that oxygen has run out and you've been knocked out. You'll be then unconscious and slowly brought into hypothermia because slowly your body temperature will drop. Medical science actually uses that to treat people who've had cardiac arrest, to try and stave off stroke. And now even they'll intentionally reduce your temperature down to 70 degrees in order to preserve you for a certain period of time to do trauma surgery on you. So it is possible to come back from those kinds of low temperatures. It may be, the FAA surmised, that the central nervous system is put into hibernation by that hypothermia. And then as you descend again, you're slowly revived by the resumption of oxygen, and suddenly you can be treated and recover. The two instances that they cited in 1993 were instances where people were flying from a warm destination to a warm destination. That may help it to explain it. The thing is, the tragic thing of this is that even if you were to survive, very much a lot of the time, if you regain, when you get back down to a survivable temperature and the wheel well opens up again, you're still unconscious, you're rattling around loose in here, and you fall out of the plane. That has happened many times. So it is a miracle, and I mean this in the most technical sense. It is a miracle that this kid could have been up in the wheel well, had all of these factors come together to keep him alive somehow, and to then recover well enough that he actually got out of the plane and seems to be surviving and going to make a full recovery right now. That is an amazing, amazing thing.
And that was our Jake Ward. Okay, let's get back to the question, how is this possible? Dr. Devi Nampiaparampil joins us now from New York. She's a physician at New York University Medical Center. And doctor, it's good to have you again.
It's good to see you too, John.
So do you buy that description from Jake? Does that make sense medically?
It does make sense. I mean, it's a partial explanation. I agree with him that there's something miraculous about this, and maybe on a couple different fronts. I mean, first of all, in terms of the oxygen, this teenager was already experiencing some of the symptoms of lack of oxygen. I mean, he was unconscious for most of the flight. Those are some of the symptoms you see when you have prolonged lack of oxygen. So you can actually fall into a coma. You can die from that itself. So he's already experiencing those symptoms. Then the other thing we talk about is forced hibernation. Well, humans aren't really made to hibernate, so that's another issue. I mean, some people do survive that. If we see people, let's say, drowning victims or skiers who've been buried alive under the snow, sometimes they're more likely to survive in these cooler temperatures than in warm temperatures. But the problem is, this boy, he didn't even have any symptoms of frostbite. He didn't have any other symptoms of hypothermia. So it really is miraculous that he didn't experience those things.
All right, I want to get to hibernation in a second, but I want to ask you about altitude first.
Sure.
What is the impact that you've talked about oxygen? Clearly, as the higher you go up, the less oxygen you have. But what else does altitude do to your body?
Well, it causes swelling around the tissues in the brain and around the lungs, so you can have a lot of fluid escape from you, and that can cause other problems. I mean, it can cause problems with your breathing, with your circulation. The swelling around the brain can cause you to have fatigue, it can cause you to have seizures, it can cause you to go into coma and die.
All right, back to hibernation for just a moment here. You say that we're not really capable of hibernation, and yet there have been these incidences, especially where their bodies get very cold, where it appears that that's what happens, right?
Well, so it's not that we're not capable, it's just that we're not really made for that, as opposed to bears. So there are some cases where people do survive this type of thing, but it's really more of a miracle. It's not a common thing. The reason that we think that is that if your body slows down because of the cold, so you're almost sort of in a frozen state, you're not really using oxygen. You don't need oxygen to keep your organs working. So if there's not much oxygen around, you may be able to survive that, at least for some time. But even in those cases, when we have people in this sort of artificial forced hibernation type state in the hospital, where they're under extremely cold temperatures, we still warm them pretty slowly because there's a lot of damage that can occur as you warm people up when they've been hypothermic. So in this case, a 5-hour flight, he cooled down pretty quickly and then he warmed up pretty quickly as well, and he was still experiencing symptoms when he got off. He was still confused. So I think there's like a few different aspects of how this was miraculous here.
Any other factors you think contributed to him surviving this 5-hour flight?
Well, I think perhaps his age is a factor. I mean, if he was older or had other medical problems, those might have contributed as well. I mean, the stress of all of these things on somebody who already has, let's say, heart disease or any other medical conditions, it might have been too much. In this case, maybe the fact that he's in good health, that also helped him. I think those other theories also make sense, that maybe there's some warmth coming from the landing gear. There are a couple different factors, but if you think about all the different things that could have gone wrong in this scenario, it's really a miracle that he survived.
It is a remarkable story. Doctor, it's good to have you on the program. Thank you very much.